Hello, I would like to welcome you to this edition of Plymouth Profiles. Plymouth Profiles is an opportunity to have a presentation from people from the greater Plymouth area. And today, once again, our guest is from Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital here in Plymouth. And we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Richard Zelman. Dr. Zelman, welcome.
Thank you, Steve.
So, Dr. Zelman, for people that might not know you, where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school?
I grew up in the New York City area. I went to New York City public schools and then to Duke University, where I did my undergraduate training in biochemistry and biology. And from there, I went to medical school at the University of Texas. And I was extremely fortunate to go from there to Harvard, to Brigham and Women's Hospital, where I did all my internship and residency and fellowship at one of the best training programs in the world for cardiology with some of the best cardiologists in the world.
And good background. My daughter actually spent 4 years at Duke as a Duke graduate, so I spent some time there. It's quite a campus.
Yeah, it's an awesome place, despite the fact that the Blue Devils didn't do very well this year.
We followed them. We follow them every year, but my daughter's graduated in 2004, and in her freshman year, they won the national championship in 2000. So
yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. So, in any event, you completed your education, and then where did you first begin some clinical work?
So I stayed in Boston for a little while, but I really wanted to practice in a setting where I could make a difference. You know, the Brigham being, an awesome, internationally recognized hospital, you could finish your work there and leave, and somebody would take your place, and you'd really never make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt that going into a community center and bringing the technology and advances that were present in Boston and the academic institutions to a more community level would really make a difference. And so I transitioned and went into practice on Cape Cod. I started the cardiac interventional service there, and continued my affiliation in Boston, initially with Brigham and Women's, and spent 30 years on Cape Cod building up the service there and bringing new technologies, sometimes much to the chagrin of people in other areas.
So for those of us that are lay people, when you say interventional service, what does that mean?
Well, that means these days, particularly, we found that the best care for heart attack patients is to be able to bring them immediately to a cardiac catheterization laboratory where we can visualize the coronary arteries on the surface of the heart, where there's typically a blockage that's causing the heart attack. And to go in often just through a small blood vessel in the wrist with a catheter and use special techniques to open that blockage and place a stent and pretty much, bring to a halt the damage that's going on to the heart. And if you can do that within 20, 30 minutes of the presentation, you can often limit any damage to the heart and certainly mitigate most of the damage that would occur and save lives. But those types of procedures need to be done in the community setting. The time to transfer patients to Boston is loss of heart muscle and often loss of life. Similarly with stroke patients, where there's a blockage in one of the arteries to the brain that causes, death to the neurons and the brain cells. It's on a time, it's on a stopwatch basically. And the quicker you can get there and the quicker you can relieve that blockage, the less damage patients will have going forward, which is extremely important. And as I said, these things have to be delivered at the community level.
And your area of expertise, are you known as a cardiologist, a cardiac surgeon? What would be your label, so to speak?
So my label would be interventional cardiologist, which is basically a minimally invasive type of surgery, basically, where these days we can not only open blocked arteries through incredibly small incisions, if you will, through small blood vessels in the periphery, we can actually now deliver new heart valves through catheter technology without opening the chest, without doing major surgery on patients. It's been an incredible transition over the course of my practice.
Now, you mentioned about bringing it to the community level, and you mentioned all those years on the Cape, and we were talking off camera about you were previously on Dateline. So tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, that was a significant part of my life back in, around the year 2000, when I felt it was important to be able to deliver these types of technology, this type of care, opening coronary arteries immediately. And I was doing these procedures up in Boston at many different hospitals there. And I felt without any question that it could be done in the community levels. And to my surprise, it was illegal in Massachusetts to do that type of procedure. There were many reasons, some of them good reasons, but most of them having to do with financial issues and wanting to keep that technology and those procedures at the larger institutions. So I partnered with Johns Hopkins to perform a study that was called the Atlantic Seaport Trial, looking to show that these procedures were necessary to be done in the community and that they could be done safely. And in fact, I personally enrolled and treated over a third of the patients in that national study. And it showed that we could do those procedures safely, and it was better than any other treatment that was available. But despite that, the Commonwealth didn't really want to change the laws. Eventually, there was a patient, a relatively young woman who came in suffering from a heart attack, and we were forced to treat her with medications at that time. She was randomized to an arm of the trial where we were not allowed to do angioplasty and place a stent. And she got much sicker, and despite our best efforts, she was dying, and she wouldn't have made it to Boston. So we did do the procedure, and to that extent, we kind of broke the law. But we saved her life, and she's gone on to live a very productive and healthy, happy life for many, many years after that. And just before they aired that segment on Dateline, the Commonwealth actually changed the laws to allow us to be able to do those procedures routinely.
And so when you did the procedure, which you said was kind of like breaking the law, were there any repercussion to that?
Fortunately not. I think everybody recognized the fact that at that point in time, there was enough proof that these procedures needed to be done in community settings. And as long as there was a physician like myself that had the appropriate training and the appropriate experience and could do these procedures, in a safe fashion, that they needed to be done that way. And now for the last 25 years, that's exactly the way we treat patients. At Beth Israel Deaconess in Plymouth, that's the way we've treated patients now there for the last 15 years, pretty much. And all over the country, it's pretty well accepted that this is what needs to be done.
And so bringing it now to Plymouth, what is it you're doing in Plymouth? What is your area of responsibility?
So I've joined Dr. Eric Osborne, who's the head of the cardiac catheterization laboratory here, and Dr. Mike McLaughlin, who's the head of cardiology, to try and work with them to bring new technologies and more care to this level. Not only doing, acute heart attack interventions, but more elective procedures. Also bringing new technologies like the valve replacement type of therapies where we can partner with our physician colleagues in Boston so that patients don't have to go to Boston multiple times. They can come see myself or one of my colleagues and have most of their care here locally. And even for procedures that can't yet be done in Plymouth, they can stay with the same physician, such as myself, who's done thousands of these procedures now, and go up to Boston and have that procedure in Boston if it can't be done here, and then come back and be followed by somebody like myself. And there are many other services that we can do here in Plymouth. There are procedures that we can do to help patients who have, for instance, high blood pressure. There are new techniques where we can use special catheters to go into the arteries to the kidneys and basically achieve much better blood pressure control for patients whose medications alone don't work well enough. That's something we can do here in Plymouth. We can care for patients who have special needs for catheter technologies to help reduce the risk of stroke. We can do that here in Plymouth. We can also take care of patients who have blockages in the carotid arteries or in arteries to the kidneys or legs. and do these things minimally invasively here in Plymouth. Many patients who come into the hospital very sick come in because they have blood clots in different areas of the body. And some of those blood clots are in the lungs. And we can go with special catheters and remove those blood clots in the lungs. And again, doing these procedures in the local setting, in the community setting, has tremendous benefit for patients in terms not only of mortality and illness, but in terms of patients' well-being long-term.
So I've lived in the Plymouth area for over 70 years, except for when I was in school and graduate school. And this certainly seems very different from what I understood to be the level of care that was available, even probably during my early adult years. It just seems as though a lot has changed in recent years in this area.
Yeah, it's been a huge transition. And I have to credit, Beth Israel Leahy for their efforts in, acquiring a hospital like what was the old Jordan Hospital. The Jordan Hospital had some excellent physicians, but it was definitely light years behind where it could have been. Beth Israel believes not in branding of hospitals, which, I've worked at different places that kind of brand as a significant specialty as being that from Harvard or Cleveland Clinic. I've worked in hospitals that have been Cleveland Clinic hospitals. And there's the name above the hospital, but there's not the dedication to actually bringing the kind of care that's at the mother institution, which is what we've seen from Beth Israel. We have incredible expertise in Boston, and many of those physicians are coming down here to the Plymouth area now to practice full-time and part-time. And the technologies are being brought to this level. And as I've said, for heart attack patients, for stroke patients, I'm hopeful in the future, if these therapies can be delivered on site, it's a tremendous benefit. And it brings up the entire level of the institution. And it attracts different levels of physicians to come practice with us.
We've heard about other types of injuries or illnesses that people have, that there's a certain amount of time in which you can do certain things. And you've explained that basically the same is going to be true with some of the areas where you intervene, that the time is of the essence.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to heart attack patients, the statement is time is muscle. Time is heart muscle. And it transitions, what would be a major heart attack that would be debilitating or life-threatening into one where patients can go home the next day off and have had no damage to the heart. Similarly with strokes, strokes are really brain attacks. We don't label them correctly. Patients don't realize that a stopwatch has started ticking from the moment they experience symptoms. And if they can get to a hospital where we can perform either with medications or with catheter techniques, therapies that restore normal blood flow in a rapid sequence of time, they can leave the hospital with no deficits or minimal deficits and go on living a very full life.
So in the past, one of our guests from Beth Israel has been the director of medicine. And what drew me to ask for you to come and join us is because a friend of mine recently fainted before church. And as a result, he went to urgent care, and they told him in urgent care to go right to the ER. And it turned out he was admitted. And then I remember talking to his wife, and she said, oh, yeah, we've decided that he's going to have a pacemaker. He needs a pacemaker, but we decided we're going to do it here in Plymouth. And I thought, I kind of sat up and said, in Plymouth, you have the pacemaker put in. So is that the type of thing that wasn't done before that now can be done?
Well, we've been doing pacemakers here in Plymouth for many, many years, but in a limited fashion, basically. There are new devices that are not only pacemakers, but we call pacemaker defibrillators that can not only correct slow heart rhythms, but what might be fatal rapid heart rhythms. Devices like that have not really been utilized here in this setting, but they can be. Mm-hmm. A whole host of electrophysiologic procedures where we treat patients with irregular heart rhythms, atrial fibrillation, for instance, very common heart rhythm disorder, which is a very common cause of stroke, actually. Many of these heart rhythms can be treated here with appropriate physicians and appropriate technology, which we can bring here, and I'm hopeful we will in the near future. I think I would really predict that over the course of the next 10 years, you'll see a huge difference again in what we can do here and what's been done previously.
And also your patient base, I mean, is it limited in age in terms of how young, how old you can be treating people with this intervention?
Well, I think, first of all, when you get to patients under the age of 18, you're dealing with pediatric cardiology, and that's a specialty unto its own. And that's something that, we leave to pediatric cardiologists who would be often at Boston Children's Hospital or centers like that. But when you get above that age, you're dealing with adult cardiology. And honestly, I've put new heart valves, for instance. The oldest patient I've treated is 103 years old. And, it was amazing. I called him a couple of weeks after the procedure on a Sunday to check on him. And he was back home and he was chatting with me. And he said, "Dr. Zelman, I have to go now. I'm sorry, but I have to get back to work."
Right.
And I was kind of astounded, but that was the whole reason for the procedure.
Sure.
To get, a 103-year-old back to their life. And his life was still working.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what we can do these days.
Yeah.
And I do feel that in my career over the last 35 years, I've made a big difference, a difference to really thousands of patients, both through my own personal efforts and through changing the way we look at how we can care for patients in the community setting and how important it is to do so.
It's great to hear about your patient 103 because I'm not retired, and I think a lot of what we have to contribute is going to depend on our health and good health in order to determine whether we can deliver services. And my brother, who's a physician, has told me, remember recently he had a patient who was in his 90s that was having fairly serious surgery, but he was in good shape and he was healthy and he did very well with the surgery. So it can happen with our seniors.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the average age in this country is increasing significantly. And along with that, the average number of illnesses that each patient has when they come to us, they're much more complicated than they were 20 or 30 years ago. We're living to an older age, but we're accumulating more and more problems as we do so.
So how do the EMTs decide where to bring a patient that has a cardiac issue in terms of, do they go to Plymouth? Do they go to Boston? What happens?
So from an EMT level, there's no reason that a patient wouldn't be brought to Beth Israel Deaconess at this time, Beth Israel Deaconess Plymouth. We offer all the services for heart attack patients that would qualify for our ambulance services to bring patients directly to us and not to divert to a different type of hospital. And that's different than it used to be because now we have these services.
And what's the percentage of patients that you're able to keep in Plymouth as compared to those that might have to move on to Boston?
I'd say that we're keeping probably 70% of our patients here, and that percentage is increasing significantly. Just in the last 6 months, we've had new technologies added to what we're doing here. We expect many more new technologies, as I've been saying, and with that, that percentage is going to continue to increase. It's not going to get to be 100%, and we wouldn't want it to be. I think that, centers like Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, where they have super specialized physicians that can care for patients who need transplantation, for instance, or really advanced forms of life support, those are still going to be integral to caring for patients who are at their sickest at that point. But for the most part, I think that a very large percentage will be able to be cared for here.
And it might be too complicated to understand, but what would be one of the new technologies that came in the past year or two?
Well, one of the things that I mentioned is that we're living to be older. And as we get older, when we acquire blockages in the arteries, they're often calcified plaque, what we used to call hardening of the arteries. That is basically plaque that's developed inside the artery wall that's now built up calcium and becomes very stiff and hardened. And it's been difficult to care for patients like that without technologies that alter the calcium, because you can't really expand the arteries and place stents and other devices. It's been thought that those devices might be too difficult to use or complicated or risky. But again, it's been proven that with physicians like those that we have staffing the cath lab and the technologists and nurses and ancillary services, that we can use those devices now to break up the calcium in the artery and to treat that type of blood vessel with a stent. Where we used to have to send those patients to Boston, we now have technologies to do that, and we're expanding those technologies.
So going back to my friend that had the pacemaker, I mean, when I talked to his wife before the procedure, it sounded like they had a choice. They could have gone to Boston or they could to Plymouth. They opted for Plymouth for all the reasons of just wanting to be, they live here,
sure.
They want to be close by. And I would think that that is another factor, is that by doing them locally, then family and friends are able to be closer to the patient.
Yeah, that's a huge factor for patients. But we have to realize that, the heart comes first. And we have a lot of patients who, don't want to go to Boston, but often that is still the best option for them, for advanced specialties, for some of the procedures that I do in Boston that can't be done here because we don't have cardiac surgery here. Patients are often reluctant to go to Boston for their care, but at the same time, they'll go up and see a Red Sox game.
Sure.
So it doesn't always make sense. And I keep telling my patients that the benefit of a center like Beth Israel Plymouth is that the same physicians can care for them in Boston and in Plymouth, and we'll know where they should get their care. And we don't have a reason to say, get your care in one place or another, unless it's the best for the patient. It's not like we benefit from the patient being cared for here as opposed to in Boston financially or otherwise. We want the patient to get their best care wherever that will be. And in partnering with Beth Israel and being in both sites, we can deliver care in that manner, which is where it's best for the patient to receive it.
And would you be considered a hospitalist, or do you have your own practice, or how does that work?
So I spend much of my time in the hospital, both here in Plymouth and at the medical center in Boston. But I do spend a day or two a week in clinic seeing patients, both before and after procedures. And I get a lot of joy from seeing how my patients are doing over the years. I have patients that I've been caring for 20 and 30 years now that I know very well.
And when did you start caring for patients? What's the total number of years that you've been doing this?
I finished my training at the Brigham in 1989, so I need a calculator.
So when you're not treating patients and working at Beth Israel, what do you like to do in your spare time?
I like to stay active. I have 3 children in the area, and before coming back to Plymouth, I spent a year in Florida at the Cleveland Clinic Center there. I missed my family a lot, so I've come back here at this point. I'm very grateful to have this position and to be back in Massachusetts close to my family. And I have a 2-year-old grandson. I expect more grandchildren. But this has been home for a long time. Yeah.
It's great to have grandchildren, be able to enjoy them too. I'm recently a grandfather as well, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's like nothing else.
And so if people joined us midway or towards the end and didn't hear everything you had to say, what would be kind of the message that you'd want them to know about what you're doing?
I'd really want people to understand that the Jordan Hospital doesn't exist anymore. Beth Israel Plymouth is a new entity. Over the course of the last decade, a tremendous amount has been added to the medical facility here. We have awesome physicians, and many of those physicians, as I say, come to us from Beth Israel, from the medical center in Boston, and share practices in both places. And we are dedicated to bringing all the technology and care that we can bring to the community level that needs to be here. And I think that patients should have confidence in that. I've built up in my practices over time a level of trust from patients that I'm very grateful for. And I think patients know that I have their best interest at heart, and so does Beth Israel.
One thing, we're taping this in April of 2026, and AI has been very prevalent recently. In fact, when I was at a hospital meeting, they were explaining to me how the hospital was using AI in some ways. And I recently had a physician ask me, do you mind if we use AI to scribe? Right. And I'm just wondering, do you use AI in any way?
I think the scribing technologies are certainly helpful for us. In many of our new medical devices, AI is built into them at some level to help facilitate calculations and derivations of how best to utilize our technologies. But AI is, many people have feared or thought that AI is going to replace physicians or caregivers. It's going to supplement how we care for patients. It's not replacing anybody. There are definitely concerns about AI in general, many of which are valid. But when it comes to medical care, it's become so complex at this point in time that facilitating the care with different artificial intelligence has definitely given us a new ability to process information and bring a different level of care to patients.
Same is true in my profession. We can use it to assist, but in the end, we have to make the decision and make sure that they don't have any hallucinations in using the AI. So you're not going to be replaced. And Dr. Richard Zelman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We appreciate you. We appreciate Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital and all that they do for us here in Plymouth. And please stay tuned as we'll continue with our second guest today. Again, we'd like to thank the staff here at the local scene. I'm joined in the studio by Melissa Mattinzi and also in the booth by Tom Bolas. And without them and their support, we couldn't be bringing this presentation to you. So again, thank you, and we look forward to having you with us momentarily. I'd like to welcome you back to this portion of Plymouth Profiles. And for our second segment, we're delighted to have another person from the greater Plymouth area. He's relatively new, and we look forward to hearing more about him. And it's the new editor-in-chief of the Plymouth Independent, David Kidwell. David, welcome.
Nice to be here.
Thank you for being here. So, David, most people probably haven't heard you yet unless they came to do the meet and greet. So tell us your background. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school?
I grew up in downstate Illinois in a farm community and always kind of wanted to go to Chicago as a kid. And I went to state school in Illinois. And most of my adult life, my adult career, was in Florida, though. I worked at the Miami Herald for many years. And then I worked at the Chicago Tribune for many years before coming here.
And so what did you do at your last job, the Chicago Tribune?
Well, after the Tribune, I went to be an investigations editor at a couple of not-for-profits in the Chicago area. And that's what I was doing. I was editing investigations. So at the Tribune, I was an investigative reporter. And I kind of left there when my editor left or retired. I left there to be an editor myself at a couple of not-for-profits. And was very fortunate there to do some really, really good work. And then I heard about this and was talking to Robbie Robinson, who, if your viewers don't know, is one of the most famous journalists in the country. And we agreed that this was probably a good fit. So here I am.
And when you did your investigative journalism in Chicago, were there any particular ones that kind of stand out?
Oh, yeah. Well, so I don't know how familiar people are here with Governor Rod Blagojevich, who was indicted and sent to prison after he got caught on a wiretap selling a U.S. Senate seat vacated by Barack Obama when he became president. The reason the feds had him up on a wire was because of a series of Tribune stories that I was involved in about how he was enriching himself and as campaign and various things that they were doing wrong. The stories that I was most involved in involved bribes that were funneled through his wife's real estate business. She was doing a lot, though. For some years, the only work she was doing as a real estate agent was people who had an interest before the governor. And so I did those stories, and that sort of led the feds to the wiretaps where they caught him selling the Senate seat.
And was that a series of?
Oh, it went on for years. There was that one. Yeah, it was kind of what I call it run and gun investigation. Yeah. Another one like that was the red light camera bribery scheme, the largest bribery scheme in Chicago history, if you can believe that. There was a red light camera company who bribed a particular official, paid him up to $2,500 per camera, passed in an envelope at a restaurant. They had somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 cameras there, and we exposed that. And then we exposed problems with the program itself where they were lax enforcement, changing enforcement. It was pretty much they plugged the city of Chicago into a cash machine and walked away. And there was no real oversight on that program at all.
So you talked to Rob Robinson and you came to Plymouth.
Yeah.
What was the draw? What kind of appealed to you about coming to this area, coming from all the excitement in Chicago?
Right. Well, I really, when I came to talk here, I mean, what really drew me here was the folks who work at the Independent. They are a bunch of veteran people. Believe it or not, I'm the youngest person on the staff there. I've
known Mark for years. Mark is
he's great.
Seasoned journalist.
He's great. A former business editor at the Boston Globe. We've got Andrea Estes, who's a former Spotlight reporter at the Boston Globe. We've got Fred Tice, who was a foreign correspondent and a longtime television reporter, speaks 5 languages, and then the board is full of people that I admire greatly. And so that's what really drew me was the level of the veteran level and the experience level of the folks that I'd be working with. I thought we could do a lot of things. And secondly to that, I do think that the model of the Plymouth Independent is the future of journalism. I think with newspapers failing and I spent my entire career one step ahead of the layoffs my entire life, and I think that there are a lot of folks in this community who recognize the value of the press, somebody watching, holding people accountable, and that drew me as well. And it's not just because of Plymouth; it's because I think that model everywhere is the future, and anything that I can do to help advance that, I'm all in on that.
I grew up on the old colony.
Oh, okay.
And having lived here all my life, and so when the Independent started, I was thrilled to get some local news because wasn't really getting local news anywhere else in print.
Right.
Only from radio or occasionally from TV. And to this day, I enjoy every morning having it come across my screen. Some days it may not be something that I'm overly interested in, but certainly, governmental news,
sure,
and some of the other civic things happening in the community, and also to be knowledgeable on other things that come up when people ask me in my professional capacity, what do you think about this case or this arrest or whatever? It's helpful to have the background that you provide.
Well, I am still on a tremendous learning curve about everything here, and I'm very, very grateful to have people like Mark and yourself and people who are around who have all of this institutional knowledge to help me through that. I grew up, I like having ink on my hands, and so I'm sort of getting used to the transition to reading a computer screen in the morning instead of a newspaper. But I know that people are doing that, and I really do think it's the future.
So if people watching this and they don't get the Plymouth Independent every morning on their email, how would they do that?
Oh,
how would they get access?
Well, they can. Well, we have, I don't know how many folks here know about All Things Plymouth or Plymouth What's Up or those kinds of Facebook pages. We're all over that. We're all over social media. They can come to PlymouthIndependent.org and sign up. There's no paywall. There's no subscription fee. It's free to everybody. And we are very, very open to suggestions from people. Our readership is like you and me. We're a lot of gray-haired people are the ones who are reading it, and we would love to figure out how to reach the younger crowds. Where I'm devising ways to cover the schools better, to cover culture in the schools, concerts and sports and any kind of cultural events in the schools. But beyond that, anything that would younger columnists, and anything that we can do to sort of penetrate and build that readership. I'll be honest with you. I grew up a reporter and not an editor. I consider myself sort of a reporter's editor. So I'm still learning how to edit a community newspaper. The editing that I have done has been mostly investigative projects. I think that's what they liked in me, and I think that's what they want more of. But it's a community newspaper, and so we're always looking for feature ideas and things that you might not fall within that realm to cover.
Just going forward, what do you see when you say this is kind of where you think things are going? Maybe as newspapers get smaller, why do you think that this is the way for the future?
Well, because I think, as in Plymouth and many in Chicago and many other places that I've read about and seen, people have, more people than you would think, have a great deal of appreciation for what's being lost with the demise of newspapers. I believe that without newspapers, that democracy can't survive. And
the press, of course, we need the press.
I know the founders of this country believe the same thing. Exactly right.
Fourth estate.
And I think people are witnessing this demise of newspapers, and they're making an investment in this sort of not-for-profit, and they like the fact that it's more independent, that it's not beholden to advertisers or corporate media, or and the idea that in journalists as well, people who, look at the journalists that we have at the Plymouth Independent, refugees from major media outlets who also recognize the value here. So I think that our readership recognizes it. I think people with resources recognize it. I think journalists recognize it as the future. And what would happen if we didn't figure out how to make a free press survive?
So you touched a little bit on the fact that it's kind of a not-for-profit. Mm-hmm. So how do you get your revenue?
We just, when I was hired, they just also hired a development director whose function is to go out and solicit donations from people, anywhere from $20 up to $1 million. And we have been incredibly successful with that. And that's why they were able to hire me. That's why they were able to hire Kelly, who's our development director. And we were having a big fundraising gala in September that she's currently raising sponsors for. So we are all sort of working towards getting to a place where we're healthy and can grow. And I think that we are on a growth trajectory.
So when you were first getting off the ground, there were founders that were supporting. I was one of them. And then there was a local media outlet that criticized the Independent for having financial support from elected officials.
Right.
and so I backed off. But what's the problem with that? What's the problem with, you're trying on the one hand be a nonprofit and the revenue based from contributions, but then it sounds like there are some people, maybe elected officials and others, if they're covered in your paper, maybe can't be financially involved.
Right. Well,
explain that to us.
We are always sensitive to the perception, even if we know that that's not happening, but it is easy for people to perceive us when we're getting money from a particular source, even if it's a developer or someone who's not an elected official who we may write about. That is an inherent conflict. And even though we work very hard to build a firewall between the people who raise the money and the people who do the journalism, we're constantly sensitive to those optics. Just like newspapers, we're sensitive to advertisers and their corporate sponsors. And so that's the issue. And our major function is accountability of elected officials. So that's a pretty bright line. And it's one thing while you're getting something up and running to have support from the community like that. It is also important to establish some sort of rules to alleviate, or at least try to help alleviate that perception of a conflict.
Good. So tell us a little bit about this gala that Kelly's overseeing.
Right. Well, I mean, you should have Kelly on to talk about that. But
well, we certainly can.
It is. And I'm sure she'd love to do it. But we've got a great venue on the waterfront. It's in September. I think she's selling tables, and now we've got Marty Barron, I think, coming in who's the old Boston Globe editor to speak. And there's going to be a silent auction, and she's collecting some really great stuff to sell, and it's all just designed to. There's going to be I believe, a sort of a history of journalism and where Plymouth has been in the history of the journalism sort of establishment, and I try to stay as far away as possible from that. So my I think I'm participating a little bit in it. I mean, in terms of that day, but I try to stay as far away from the solicitation of those sponsors as possible.
So what's the date of the gala?
September. I know it's in late September.
Late September, okay, in 2026. And if people watching wanted to contact you or the Independent, is there an email address or a phone number they can contact?
Sure. I'm happy to give my email address is david@plymouthandependent.org.
Okay.
Easy enough. Anybody who works at the Independent, first name @independent.org. You can write to us. You can go to our website, go to our online site and write to us. You can write a letter to the editor. You can, contact us directly. I mean, I'm in that mode where I'm just trying to talk to as many people as possible. So I welcome any kind of input at all from anybody.
We first met when you spoke to the Plymouth Rotary Club, the Noon Club, and so you're available to speak to other groups as well.
Absolutely. I don't know at some point whether my time will be limited just because of the job, but I view that as an important part of my job right now, is getting to know folks and getting to know what the issues are and what's important to people.
And although you've been there a short time, are there any particular things that have happened or stories that you think are particularly strong for the Independent?
Well, I know that there's a big controversy coming about what to do at the old nuclear power plant. There's a lot of discussion about these. I know the governor is on board with trying to develop these smaller, apparently safer nuclear reactors, and whether that Plymouth is going to be a place for that. And I know that that's going to be a very hot button issue. Environmental preservation, which is, congruent to that, has been very, 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 people have talked to me a lot about that. The government aspect of it, the election this year, the election for select board on May 16th, this is my first election here, but from everything that I've heard from everybody that I've talked to, that it is particularly acrimonious this time around for whatever reason. I don't know if that's because of the climate of national politics or whatever, or people have figured out that sort of thing works or what, but it's been an interesting election season. So
I said this a number of times recently, particularly following town meeting, but even before, is that the Massachusetts Moderators Association this year is promoting a theme of the need for good civic discourse within our communities. And I think part of that stems from what you just said, because at the national level, we're not always seeing healthy, good discourse. We're seeing crude and rude discussion at times. And so certainly at the local level, we try to promote that, although at a recent town meeting, we did have some outbursts. And so we've had to address that. And in terms of the upcoming election, there are contested seats. I mean, it wasn't but a couple of years ago when our current chair ran unopposed. And this year we have 4 candidates. Another area, I don't know if you have any thoughts on it yet, but would be something that I care about is school committee, because I'm a former chair of the school committee, but I have now 4 grandchildren, and one of them is already enrolled in public schools. So any thoughts on school committee?
Well, we just wrote this story about the former schools food services director who was apparently embezzling food and equipment for more than a decade, unchecked. And so one of my initial questions was, how does that happen? Don't they get aren't things that they have to go through audits? Because I know where I come from, they have to, if it's not once a year, it's once every 3 years. So I'm very curious to get a little bit under that. I think that if we are on a growth trajectory, and I'm allowed to, I think one of my first hires would be an education reporter. I think that's an important, it is an enormous part of the money that comes out of each of our salaries every year, and it's not really covered that well.
It's in Plymouth, it's more than half the budget.
Yeah.
And we have lots of schools and lots of school children. And for many of us who are involved in local government and in civic activities, it's often our first introduction to becoming involved in the community. And I know for myself, that's how I first became involved. And in fact, at the time when I first ran for school committee, there was an article in the Old Colony front page that said, I'm a candidate, but I hadn't voted in local elections. And of course, I said, well, yeah, and I admit that. But again, I just didn't fully appreciate how important it was. I haven't missed an election since then. But like many people, because we only have still 10 or 12% of the population vote, or the voters voting, how do you get people involved? And one of those early areas is when they start having children in school. They say, oh, wait a minute, I guess it is important to know who's on your school committee.
Right. And you would think that the people who are paying for the schools who don't have kids in it would be even more interested. Where is my money going, right? Yeah. So I think that it's an incredibly important thing, not just for the people who have kids in schools, but for especially, fiscal conservatives who wonder, whether all the money's going to the right places.
There are some things that are in the Independent that people may not think are that important, but I know something as your obituary section.
Yep.
It's helpful for many of us to be able to have a place to go to see and keep up with some of the people who have passed this life, just to know that. And there aren't a lot of places. I mean, you can't always Google and find what you need. So what is being done to assure that quite a few people in the community are featured?
Right. Well, I love writing obituaries. Especially when you can get a little deeper into someone's life, and you learn so much. One of the things I noticed when I got here was we have obituaries section, but we don't have a birth section or an engagement section or a wedding section. So we do a pretty good job of covering death, but not so good a job of covering life, and that's just a resource issue. But that's one of the things that I think that I'm going to try to fix. Is again to get the younger crowd in, and anybody who has any. What I would like to do, and what I think any good newspaper did with the obituary section, is to anticipate, to find the people in the community who are of note, and get ahead of it, and go and talk to them and interview them, and bank all of this data, so we're not scrambling at the last minute. I think that enhances the value of the obituary at the end of the day.
It may not be fully understood by everybody, but it can be so comforting to people to be able to read. Recently, I had a friend locally who lost her daughter to questionable circumstances, and her daughter was in her 20s. And
Right.
I went to your paper and I read the obituary. And when I talked to the mother afterwards who lost her daughter, I said what a nice piece it was. And she was comforted by that. She was pleased that some nice things were written about her daughter that
It's great.
she had just passed. So very important. But I agree that, when I was younger, there was a lot in the local paper about weddings and anniversaries.
Right.
So and births.
Yep. It's important. I mean, again, it's not where I come from as a journalist, but it's a community newspaper. We want to do, like you said, everybody's going to read us, and sometimes there's going to be things that don't interest them, and sometimes there are, but that's the definition of a community newspaper. We try to touch on everything to some degree.
Yes. So David, if people joined us partway through this and didn't hear the entire presentation, what's the one thing that you'd want them to know about the Plymouth Independent?
The one thing I want them to know about the Plymouth Independent is the people who are working there, the journalists who work there, are some of the best in the country. And refugees from Boston, refugees from other parts of the country who have come here because they love the community and they love the idea of the Independent. I want them to know that we are going to do watchdog journalism, keeping an eye on the money, how it's spent, and holding government officials accountable. In addition to everything else, that was my focus. I think that's why they hired me, and I think that's where I would like to take the Independent.
So David, when you're not working at the Independent, and I know you've been here a short time, but even before you came here, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Oh, I like to travel. I like the outdoors. I can't wait for the weather to get so nice so I can take my motorcycle up the coast. I've never done Maine or Vermont or New Hampshire or Massachusetts that way. I want to go out to Provincetown. I want to get out to Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard and Newport. So much to do here that I have never seen, and so much to learn. I'm a little bit of a history nerd, so this is heaven for me.
I was going to say, if you're a history nerd, it's probably no better place.
Exactly.
Because we would say this is where it all began.
Yeah, I've already done the whole Mayflower and the Plymouth Pawtuxet Museum thing, and there's so much left to do.
Well, good. David Kidwell,
So good to be here.
Plymouth Independent, thank you so much for being here. And this concludes this presentation of Plymouth Profiles. Please join us for future editions when we'll be bringing you people from the greater Plymouth area that have an impact upon us. I'm Steve Triffletti. Thank you for joining us.